So earlier today, the Reform Party had their press conference in what looked like a crappy PowerPoint presentation. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole conference, but there was one bit in particular that made me chuckle, and that was Reform leader, also Talk TV host. Sorry, is it now GB News? Wonderful for democracy. Richard Tice. He said that Labour and the Tories are two sides of the same socialist coin, and we live in a nanny state.
The Tories have become like the Labour Party. Two sides of the same socialist coin. We've got record high taxes, we've got record high wasteful government spending, and yet disastrous outcomes, whether it's in health, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in housing, trying to see a GP, everything is getting worse. We've got record nanny state regulations. They've utterly failed to take advantage of the great Brexit opportunity that offers so much promise, and still does, with the right leadership.
So there's a lot of claims there, and yes, he's correct in saying that things are broken. I think we can all agree this country is completely broken. But what does this have anything to do with socialism? It doesn't. This man is a complete clown. Now let's take some of his points here. So taxes are the highest it's ever been. Now, according to the IFS, at the time of the last general election, UK tax revenues amounted to around 33% of national income. By the time of the next election in 2024, on current forecasts, taxes will amount to around 37% of national income, a level not sustained in the post-war period, compared with the world in which taxes had stayed at 33% of national income. The UK government will be raising upwards of 100 billion more in tax revenues next year. Now, on the face of it, bringing in £100 billion in tax revenues isn't a bad thing. The problem is what you spend that money on. Now, we continue. This is in no small part due to a raft of tax-raising measures announced over the last few years. Notable examples include the big increase in the main rate of corporation tax from 19% to 25%, the energy profits levy, and freezes to various income tax and national insurance thresholds. So a lot of the taxes have been on big business and profits, which is a damn good thing. Now, they don't go far enough, in my opinion, but taxes were raised off the back of the pandemic. So when we talk about tax cuts, the only tax cuts I want to hear are tax cuts on those on a lower income. Now, usually when the political right talk about tax cuts, they often mean the rich. Now, Rishi Sunak, he is looking at tax cuts, but where? Not on national insurance, not on lower incomes, but on inheritance tax, which is like 4% of the country. Then we see Tice talk about record spending. Okay, sure, but again, we had to spend trillions on the pandemic. Then he goes on to say that the UK has record nanny state regulations. That is such a weird phrase. Like, what does that actually mean, apart from a bunch of buzzwords? Also, Reform are clearly trying to import American right-wing talking points. Are we a nanny state? No, it's bollocks. I don't think 330,000 people dying due to cuts is a nanny state. I don't think the existence of homelessness and poverty is a nanny state. I don't think crumbling infrastructure is a nanny state. Basically, from this rhetoric, we can paint a picture of what Reform actually are, and simply, they are just a bunch of neoliberals. They want to do away with regulation to allow corporations to engage in even more exploitation in order to increase profits. We've tried that so many times. We're still doing it, and it doesn't enrich the people of this nation because we know the wealth doesn't trickle down. Now, the next point he talks about is record immigration, but I pointed out in a video a while ago that immigration has a net benefit to the economy, and if you cared at all about growth, then you wouldn't make immigration a focal point to your political campaign. Of course, this is just pure opportunism from Reform because they want to gain votes. But still, none of this relates to socialism. None of these things make Labour or the Tories socialist. But this is what happens when you allow the political debate to move to the right. It's just the same as when you got idiot Republicans calling Obama a communist, when in reality, he's just a centre-right establishment corporate Democrat. And I think thanks in part to Starmer, because he allowed the political debate to move to the right by providing zero opposition. And we now have a scenario where a smaller Thatcherite party is not only calling Labour socialist, but the Tories too. And socialism is becoming synonymous with woke, which is essentially anything conservatives don't like, they just add a label to it, regardless of its meaning. Now, later in the video, Tice talks about spending or wasteful spending, yet is concerned about the level of taxes. Now, despite Tice pretending that Reform is any different to the mainstream parties, this is what all of them have said. Labour and the Tories have both made the claim that taxes are too high and that spending is too high. But do you see the contradiction here? If you think spending is too high, then why would you want to decrease the tax intake? The reason being is to shrink the state, which is neoliberal, which is what the Tories have always been about, which is what reform is, and it's what Labour have recently become. The second thing, which isn't mentioned in the Reform press conference, which would solve the issue of wasteful spending, is privatisation. If there's one example of waste, it's the bureaucratic and frankly corrupt system of privatisation. When it comes to our railways, we are often having to subsidise corporate profits, and then those companies run our services really, really badly. When it comes to healthcare, we spend more because of PFI, and we are in debt to private companies. This is something the Tories have been happy to continue, and it's something Labour want to expand. If Wes Streeting becomes Health Secretary, he's going to go on a privatisation binge. So if Reform wanted to be different from other parties, they could talk about that. But instead, they continue to use the right-wing myth that we are going to run out of money and go bankrupt by spending too much, whilst also wanting to cut taxes and regulation. It is nothing new. Tice is definitely correct when he says that Labour and the Tories are two sides of the same coin, but it's also the same coin Reform is on, which is neoliberalism. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are looking at Reform, but I'm pleading with you, don't be fooled. There's nothing substantial about them. There's nothing substantial in their policy platform that will improve the lives of the working class. They are just the same as all the others.